KH talk that I attempted to do on Sunday. I enjoyed the topic. I really liked it. I thought it was a good one to share. But the way that I set up the PowerPoint, the way that I kind of presented the topic itself, it didn't really translate well. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of trying to go back and explain little basic concepts, and I felt like I kind of needed to do I needed to redo it. I needed to do a final mix version of the KH talk. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that now. We're doing that now. That's what this KH talk is. So the word of the day for today's topic is, I would say, accessibility. To kick things off, I've got a little tweet that I sent out a couple days ago. I'm not sure if you guys have ever gotten the whole "it's for kids" argument. You just kind of like get into a conversation with somebody about, like, I don't know, like a video game or this or that, and then they'll hit you with the big fat like, well, this is a kid's game. It's really not that big of a deal. You got to think about the kids. You got to look out for the kids, all right? Not everybody is going to be a god gamer like you, Bloody Biscuits, where they're going to test out every single individual thing and try every single possibility or different concept in each situation. You got to think about the kids, man. Some people just want to go in and they just want to press buttons and just have a good time. I don't really get it. It always weirds me out because when I think about Kingdom Hearts as a franchise, it's already extremely accessible in the first place. Think about playing Kingdom Hearts 1 and KH2 for the first time. Like, the majority of us, I would assume, played KH1 and KH2 as kids. We got through it. I'm sure we did perfectly fine getting through. It's not like Kingdom Hearts is this difficult franchise to get into. It's very much just accessible for literally everybody. The big problem for me, though, is when I'll levy some sort of criticism towards a game. Like, I'll be like, I don't really understand why they did, like, situation commands this way. I don't understand why they did this mechanic this way. It seems like really confusing. It feels like these things are conflicting with each other. And then you just get hit with the fat, like, well, Bloody Biscuits, this is made for kids, all right? It's supposed to be just designed so that people just fucking boop, bop, boop, hit the button and don't even worry about it. It frustrates me because it feels like there were a few Kingdom Hearts games that really struck a good balance between accessibility and depth, having this great balance where it's accessible for a lot of kids or for anybody of any age, and there's also a lot of depth in it when you get further into the game and you really start to try out different concepts, try out a bunch of different mechanics in different situations. That depth is still retained. The fear of dumbing a franchise down that's already pretty accessible, eventually dumbing it down to a certain point is going to lower the skill ceiling. It's going to come with consequences. It's like, who are you defending in this situation? Like, who are you really defending? Are you really trying to say that kids don't have the ability to, like, problem solve, to come up with different solutions for different situations when they're presented with a problem? I always found it really weird. So that's kind of why I threw up this tweet in the first place. It was met with a relatively warm response. There was one tweet here in particular. Super Butterbuns responded, and she basically nailed it right on the head. I always felt that gameplay that's simple for kids but had a super high skill ceiling for adults is really the sweet spot of a family-friendly experience. And that's kind of like how I've always felt about, like, specifically about Kingdom Hearts, that this concept of being accessible for just about anybody, but still retaining a lot of depth for people to spend hours upon hours, years even, on that game, and still they continue to find new things about the game. The tweet that Buns made really got me thinking about this particular video that Core Gaming made. And if you guys don't know who Core Gaming is, if you guys don't know who Gerald is, he makes fantastic video essays about fighting games. He really widens the scope to the point where just about anybody can understand what he's talking about, even if they've never played a single fighting game in their entire life. I'm not going to show you the whole video, but I did want to kind of explain how he sets up this video. And what he does in this video is he talks about the complexities of fighting games and how certain anime fighters like Guilty Gear, like Blaze Blue, like Persona Arena, all these complex fighting games have a lot of interesting and cool depth and unique mechanics in them, but they also kind of come with an accessibility issue. He widens the scope from just complex fighting games, and then he talks about a different fighting game called Dive Kick. It's really funny. It's a 2-button fighter, but it's still a dope-ass fighting game, and there's actually depth within that fighting game, and you can have like a really good fucking time playing Dive Kick. Basically what he does, and I love how he does this visually, he puts complex fighting games and Dive Kick on a scale. He talks about this area right here, which is completely unexplored terrain. It was really hard to find a fighting game that was both accessible, like Dive Kick, and all the other complex fighting games. I mean, he goes over a bunch of different topics, but eventually he lands on this fighting game called Fantasy Strike.
Serlin, the creator of Fantasy Strike, doesn't think so.
What I like to think of, there's a spectrum where Dive Kick is on the far end over here. And when people play that and they say, this is really cool, what can I play next? The next thing they can play is a huge jump to all the other fighting games clustered on the other end. And there's really nothing here. And so we're trying to be in the middle between Dive Kick and everything else.
Like it really takes the execution and it makes it a lot easier, and yet it still has a lot of the flavor that other complex fighting games have to offer. Fantasy Strike is kind of like it's that buffer period where you can still play, you can play and you can actually do combos and you can do supers, and you don't have to put in a shit ton of hours to truly appreciate it. And it kind of eases you into the rest of the genre of fighting games in general. And then I thought to myself, what if we just applied this to action games? This is what I came up with. I don't know. I really thought about the scale, and I thought it was really interesting to think about. Before anybody in chat jumps out at me and they're like, well, it's an action RPG. Like genre doesn't really matter within this context. Like it's not about RPG or anything like that. It's literally just, if you are a character moving around and you're, attacking other things, then yeah, it's an action game. Like the goal of an action RPG might be different than that of like a Bayonetta or a DMC. And they might achieve it in different ways. The RPG aspect might make it so that, a game can't fully reach like the level of complexity that like a DMC or a Bayonetta or an MGR might achieve. I don't think that means that like 2FM can't be on this scale, right? Or at least like this high on a scale either. What I really like is I like that KH2FM is right here in the middle. I think that KH2FM being in the middle between simple games and complex action games is extremely important. I find it really hard nowadays to find action games that are easily accessible to just about any player to pick up and play and have a really good time, and also mechanically deep and mechanically rich. And there's a lot of depth to be had. And if the more that you put into the game, the more fun that you have, the more the game gives back to you. It's easily accessible in the sense that you have a one-button auto combo that you can just use to be your main damage dealer, where you can just press a single button and you can do a really cool flashy combo. And that's really satisfying to a lot of people that are just getting into it for the first time. It's really fun and exciting to see your character be doing that. And then the more time that you put into the game, the more that you find out about the system, the more you realize that it can be even more than just a button masher. The more you realize that a lot of the more complex strategies are fun and exciting to execute and try out, and just to try out the different summons, the different drives that you never really thought about before because you didn't try them out. There's a system where it invites it at the very base level, and it just kind of carries you along the more that you play it. The higher difficulties that you go, the more that you just experiment and try things out, the more you look things up and you're like, oh man, this YouTube video is so sick. I didn't even realize that you could use Final Form in such a way where you're using the finisher and then you use fire and then you like land on the ground and you start the combo over again. It's like this crazy infinite combo that you're doing. That's crazy. I think that it's important that a game like that exists, where getting to a level of like intentionality in a game, in other more complex games like a DMC, it requires a lot more effort. It requires a lot more effort on the player side to actually get to a point where you're doing really cool fancy combos, where you're really using every single style to its fullest extent, where you're really developing strategies. You have to put a lot more time and a lot more effort into the game, and it's a lot more punishing just on a very basic level. Like Kingdom Hearts games, difficulty wise, are not very hard unless you choose like the highest difficulty, whereas like in DMC, or just like either like normal or hard or very hard or whatever, just like, or Devil Hunter, whatever you want to call it, base level difficulties are pretty brutal. They're pretty punishing for people that have never tried an action game before. And it requires a lot more like grit. You really got to push yourself through that in order to experience the full game and really get into it. And a game like Bayonetta too, where like maybe necessarily Bayonetta isn't what you would call a hard game. It's not like super brutal like a DMC would be. But it still is more difficult than KH2FM in the sense that in order to execute more powerful attacks, you have to learn dial-up combos. You have to learn the button combinations that lead to the umbral attacks that do the launches or like the foot stomps and other stuff like that. So like the last portion that I have here is a question that I've gotten a lot. I guess people are either action game fans or they see me playing KH2FM and they rightfully assume that I'm a fan of action games. I really do enjoy them. They would ask me the sort of thing like, would you make KH go full on action game? Like assume that you're Tetsuya Nomura and you had the ability to just remake Kingdom Hearts as a pure action game series. You take out all the numbers, you take out the RPG mechanics. Just make Kingdom Hearts more of an action game. Would I do that? But the answer is no, and it's for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. I think that it's important that the Kingdom Hearts series continues to stay as that accessible game. It's inviting to everybody, and people can pick up the game immediately and start doing cool stuff without having to put in a lot of effort. And at the same time, the more effort that you put into the game, the more complexity shines through, the more stuff that you find out about the video game. I think that Kingdom Hearts should continue to do that. I think that it should stay in that lane because I think it's an important role. And honestly, I feel like more games in general should try and strike that balance between, accessible for anybody of all ages and mechanically deep the more you spend time with it. In one aspect, I think that Kingdom Hearts is perfectly okay where it is right now. And at the same time, it feels like the more time passes, the more that the Kingdom Hearts franchise is slowly moving from here all the way down to where the rest of the other action games are, where they're just very, very simple. Honestly, like shit, if you were to ask me straight up where Kingdom Hearts 3, where base KH3 would stand, it's over here, guys. KH3 Remind, though, it's like over here, probably. Just KH3 Remind is probably over here, but KH3 by itself, it's probably over here. That's the sort of thing that I worry about, man. I fear for the future of Kingdom Hearts, that it continues to be casualized over and over and over again to the point where the skill ceiling just drops, just plummets.